My husband stood across the kitchen, eyes sharp, jaw tight, every ounce of anger radiating off him. We had been married for 7 years. 7 years of shared space, shared routines, shared arguments that never quite got resolved. And in that moment, he decided to end it all with one violent gesture. He grabbed his keys off the counter and threw them straight at me. "Be out before the new year," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I'm staying at my sister's tonight. When I come back after midnight, you better be gone. Take your things and get out of my house." I caught the keys instinctively, my hands moving before my emotions could catch up. They were heavier than I expected. House key, car key, mailbox key, all on the same ring I had given him years ago, back when we still believed this place belonged to both of us. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. "On time," I said quietly. He blinked, thrown off. "What?" "I'll be out on time," I repeated. "You want me gone by New Year? I'll be gone by New Year." That calm seemed to irritate him more than if I had exploded. He scoffed, grabbed a bag, shoved clothes into it, and slammed the door hard enough to make the windows rattle. I stood there alone in the kitchen, keys still in my hand, listening to the echo fade. What he didn't realize was that the house we lived in was mine. I bought it 3 years before I even met him. My name was on the deed. My credit was on the loan. My money paid for every renovation, every upgrade, every improvement. He moved in after we got married and immediately started redecorating like it was a joint project. I didn't mind at first. Marriage is about compromise, right? But that night, December 28th, something shifted. He thought he had thrown me out of my own house. What he didn't know was that 8 months earlier, I had installed a smart lock system, one he never bothered to learn how to use, one setting he never paid attention to. And when he came back after midnight, ready to start his new year without me, the house answered first. Before that night, before the keys and the ultimatum, our life looked ordinary from the outside. I was 35 years old. We had been married for 7 years. No kids, no dramatic scandals, no obvious breaking point that friends could point to and say, "Ah, that makes sense." Just a slow erosion that happened quietly over time. The house we lived in was mine. I bought it 3 years before we even met. Back then, it was small, practical, nothing fancy. I worked hard, saved aggressively, fixed things myself when I could, hired help when I couldn't. By the time I paid off the mortgage 2 years ago, the house felt like proof that I had built something solid on my own. When we got married and he moved in, things changed fast. He treated the house like a shared canvas. New paint colors, new furniture, decorative pieces I didn't care about, but agreed to, because marriage was supposed to be about compromise. I told myself it was fine, that it was just stuff, that sharing space meant sharing decisions. At first it felt harmless. The problems didn't start loudly. They crept in through money and expectations. We argued about spending, about his impulse purchases, about the way bills were suddenly ours, while income slowly became mine. 6 months before everything blew up, he quit his job. He said he needed to find himself, said the stress was unbearable, said he'd go back once he figured out what he really wanted. I supported him, emotionally, financially, quietly. I covered everything: mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance. I didn't throw it in his face. I didn't keep score out loud. I told myself this was temporary, that partners step up when the other one struggles. But resentment doesn't need permission to grow. He started acting like the house was a given, like it existed by default, not because of years of work before him. He talked about our place as if ownership came automatically with marriage. I corrected him once, gently, and watched his expression harden in a way that stayed with me. We stopped resolving arguments. We just circled them. By December, the air between us felt heavy. We spoke politely, carefully, like people trying not to trigger something they didn't want to deal with during the holidays. I worked from home that week, wrapping up end-of-year projects, enjoying the quiet. I didn't know he had already made up his mind. On December 28th, when he walked in that afternoon angry, flushed, and ready to talk, I thought it would be another argument, another loop we'd go through and ignore afterward. I didn't realize it was the moment he decided to rewrite our entire reality. And I definitely didn't realize he thought he could throw me out of a house that had been mine long before he ever existed in it. Looking back, the signs were there long before the keys ever left his hand. They just didn't look like warnings at the time. After he quit his job 6 months earlier, something subtle shifted in the way he carried himself inside the house. At first, he was apologetic, grateful, almost overly attentive, like he knew he was asking for patience. He cooked more, cleaned more, talked about plans, ideas, things he might do once he figured himself out. Then, slowly, that gratitude faded. Bills became invisible to him. Groceries refilled themselves. The lights stayed on without question. The house, the life, the stability, all became background noise instead of something maintained by effort. When I worked late, he'd comment on how lucky I was to have such a flexible job. When I mentioned money, even casually, his shoulders would tense. "Why are you stressing about it?" he'd say. "We're fine." We weren't fine. We were surviving on one income while he floated. Arguments started circling the same topics. His spending, his lack of contribution, his assumption that time would somehow fix everything. He accused me of being controlling, of not supporting his journey. I accused him of avoiding responsibility. Neither of us listened very well anymore. What hurt more than the money was the entitlement. He started referring to the house as ours in a way that felt less affectionate and more possessive. He talked about changes he wanted to make without asking. He told friends casually that he'd never leave this place like it was guaranteed. Once, during an argument, he said, "I've lived here 7 years. This is my home as much as yours." That sentence stayed with me. I corrected him gently, told him I understood how it felt emotionally, but legally, the house was mine. I expected a discussion. What I got instead was silence, the kind that feels like something is being stored away, not resolved. From then on, the air in the house felt tight. We avoided big conversations. We tiptoed around each other, pretending things were normal, while quietly resenting one another. December came, and with it, the end-of-year lull at work. I stayed home more. He stayed restless. I didn't know he was already planning an exit. I didn't know he had decided that leaving meant taking control of the narrative, the space, the house itself. I just knew that by the time he walked in that afternoon on December 28th, his anger felt rehearsed. And when someone rehearses anger, it's usually because they think they're in the right. That's when I understood this wasn't just about unhappiness anymore. It was about power. December 28th started like any other quiet end-of-year workday. I had been working from home, finishing up loose ends before the holiday break. The house was unusually still, the kind of calm that usually feels peaceful, but that day felt tense, like it was holding its breath. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard his car pull into the driveway. The sound alone made my shoulders tighten. He came through the door already angry. His face was flushed, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping. I looked up from my laptop instinctively. "Hey," I said. "We need to talk," he cut in sharply. I closed my laptop and set it aside. "Okay." He threw his purse onto the counter hard enough that I heard something inside crack. The noise echoed through the kitchen. "I'm done," he said. "I want a divorce." For a moment, I just sat there, processing the words. We'd been struggling, yes, arguing about money, about his spending, about the fact that he'd quit his job 6 months earlier and hadn't contributed financially since. But divorce felt like 0 to 60 without a warning sign. "Can we talk about this?" I asked carefully. "What's going on?" "There's nothing to talk about," he snapped. "I'm not happy. I haven't been for a long time. I want out." I took a slow breath. "All right. If that's what you want, we can figure it out. But let's do this properly. Lawyers, paperwork. We split things fairly." "I'm not waiting months for lawyers," he said. "I want you out. Now." "Out." He pointed toward the door, like the decision was already made. "Out of my house." "Our house," he corrected himself immediately. "Community property. I have just as much right to be here as you do." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Actually, you don't," I said calmly. "This house was mine before we got married. You moved in after. It's not community property." His face went red. "We've been married 7 years," he shot back. "I've lived here 7 years. That makes it mine, too." "That's not how it works," I replied. "Check with a lawyer if you want, but this house is mine. If anyone's leaving, it should probably be you." That's when he snapped. He grabbed his keys off the counter and threw them straight at me. Hard. They hit my chest before I caught them reflexively. "Be out before the new year," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I'm staying at my sister's tonight. When I come back after midnight, you better be gone. Take your stuff and get out of my house." I looked down at the keys in my hand. House key, car key, mailbox key, all on the same ring I'd given him when he moved in. "On time," I said quietly. He blinked. What? I'll be out on time, I repeated. You want me gone by New Year? I'll be gone by New Year. He seemed thrown by how easily I agreed. Then he nodded sharply. Good. Finally. He grabbed a bag, stuffed clothes into it without folding anything, and stormed out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat there alone, keys still in my hand, listening to the silence settle back in. And that was the moment I knew this wasn't just a breakup. It was a miscalculation. After he left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. I sat there for a long moment, keys still resting in my palm, replaying the scene in my head as if I might have misunderstood something. 7 years of marriage reduced to an ultimatum and a slammed door. No discussion, no cooling off period, just a demand that I disappear from a life I had built long before he entered it. I didn't feel anger right away. What I felt was disbelief. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, noticing details I had stopped seeing years ago. The walls he had repainted, the furniture he had insisted on buying, the little compromises I had made because marriage was supposed to mean sharing. With every step, the same thought kept surfacing. How did it get here? I sat down at the kitchen table and forced myself to breathe evenly. My hands were steady, my thoughts were not. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. What did I miss? We had argued, yes, about money, about his decision to quit working, about how long finding himself was supposed to take. But I had never imagined he'd reach for divorce like a weapon, or try to push me out of my own home as if that would somehow make everything easier for him. I checked the time, still hours before midnight. I knew one thing for certain. If I reacted emotionally now, I'd lose control of the situation. So instead of confronting him, instead of sending angry messages or calling his sister, I did what I'd always done when things got overwhelming. I gathered information. I remembered the smart lock system I'd installed 8 months earlier, the one he'd dismissed as unnecessary, the one he never bothered to learn how to use. I opened the app on my phone and scrolled through the settings, reading carefully, thinking deliberately. I didn't change his access. I didn't lock him out. I didn't do anything impulsive. I adjusted one setting he had never paid attention to. Then I picked up the phone and started making calls. First, my lawyer. He was technically on vacation, but answered when I said it was urgent. I explained everything, from the argument to the keys hitting my chest. He laughed softly, not amused, but incredulous. He tried to throw you out of your own house, he said, the one you bought before the marriage. That's what he's attempting, I replied. You know he has no legal standing, my lawyer said. That house is your separate property. I know, I said, but I'm going to leave anyway, temporarily. I want it documented that he forced me out and initiated the separation. There was a pause, then approval. That's smart. Where will you stay? I have a friend with a spare room, just for a few days. Good. I'll file for legal separation first thing after the new year. Send me everything you have. Messages, video, witnesses. I had more than he realized. The doorbell camera had captured the entire exchange, the argument, the keys being thrown, the ultimatum. The audio was clear. I sent him the file immediately. Then I started packing. Not everything, just enough to make it clear that I had left. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, important documents. I moved methodically, calmly, as if I were following a checklist instead of dismantling my life. By 11 o'clock, the house looked different. Lived in, but incomplete. I checked the app one more time. Everything was set. At 11:30, I walked out the front door, got into my car, and drove away. For the first time that night, I felt something close to calm. I hadn't even finished unpacking at my friend's place when the first call came in. It was 12:47 a.m. His name lit up my phone. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. I declined it. A few seconds later, the text started coming through. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? The lock's changed. I can't get in. This is my house. Call me right now. I didn't reply. I set my phone to do not disturb and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. When I woke up the next morning, January 1st, my phone was full. 63 missed calls, over 100 messages, most from him, some from his sister, a few from his mother. I made coffee, sat at the table, and read through every message carefully while taking notes. The story they told was clear. He had gone to his sister's place for New Year's Eve. There had been drinks, a countdown, a celebration of his fresh start. Just after midnight, he'd driven back to the house, ready to come home alone, ready to begin his new life without me. The key had turned. The deadbolt had clicked, and the door hadn't opened. He'd tried again, and again. Then he'd tried the code, the one I'd given him 8 months earlier when I installed the smart lock system, the one he'd brushed off as unnecessary. Of course, he didn't remember it. He'd never used it before. He stood on the porch in the cold for nearly 45 minutes, trying random numbers, convinced I had changed something. He called, he texted, he got no response. Eventually, around 2 in the morning, he went back to his sister's place. His messages from the morning were angrier, more threatening. "You changed the locks on my house. This is illegal. I'm calling the police. My lawyer will destroy you." I replied once, "I didn't change the locks. The automatic deadbolt engaged at its scheduled time. You still have your key and your code. I'm staying elsewhere, as you requested. We can discuss property matters through our lawyers." The response was immediate. "You locked me out." "The house locked itself," I replied. "It's an automatic system. Same one you never bothered to learn how to use. Check your email from 8 months ago. I sent you the code and instructions." There was silence for 20 minutes. Then, "I want back in my house now." "It's not your house," I replied. "We'll handle this legally." He called again. I declined. He called from his sister's phone. Declined. Then his mother called. I answered that one. "What's going on?" she asked, confused, not angry. "I left the house like he demanded," I said calmly. "The house has an automatic security system. He has access. He just doesn't know how to use it." "Can you come let him in?" she asked. "No," I said. "He told me to leave. I left. He wants back in. He can figure out the system himself." She sighed. "This is all very complicated." He made it complicated when he threw keys at me and tried to force me out of my own home. After that call, I blocked his sister's number. I blocked his mother's number. I left only his unblocked, so I could document everything. Around 3 in the afternoon, my doorbell camera sent me an alert. Someone was at the house. I opened the app and watched live footage of him standing on the porch with a locksmith. My stomach tightened, but I didn't panic. I called my lawyer immediately. "He's trying to break into my house," I said. "Record everything," my lawyer replied. "Don't confront him. Let him make mistakes." I watched as the locksmith examined the smart lock, watched him shake his head, watched him explain something on his phone, watched my husband argue, gesturing angrily. Then the locksmith packed up his tools and left. My husband stood there for another 10 minutes, phone pressed to his ear, pacing, furious. Finally, in frustration, he tried the key again. This time, the door opened. The automatic deadbolt had disengaged at 8 a.m., part of the regular schedule I'd set months ago when we were still living there together. I watched him step inside. I watched him walk through the house, room by room, seeing my things gone. Watching his face shift from anger to confusion to something close to realization. My phone rang. I answered. "You moved out," he said. "You told me to," I replied. "I didn't think you expected me to stay." "This is insane," he said. "We need to talk." "We already did," I said. "Now we'll talk through lawyers." And that's when he finally understood. He hadn't thrown me out. He had set everything in motion himself. That night, after the call ended, the adrenaline drained out of me all at once. I sat on the edge of my friend's bed, phone face down on the nightstand, staring at nothing. The room was quiet, but my head wasn't. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the heater, a car passing outside, my own breathing, uneven and shallow. This was the lowest point. Not when he threw the keys. Not when he demanded I leave. Not even when he stood locked out in the cold. The lowest point was realizing how close I had come to losing everything simply because I trusted the wrong assumptions. I kept replaying his voice in my head, the certainty with which he'd said, "out of my house," the confidence behind it. He truly believed that 7 years of marriage erased everything that came before, that my work, my savings, my name on the deed somehow didn't matter anymore. And for a moment, that belief had shaken me. I thought about the version of myself from years ago, the woman who bought that house alone, who signed those papers without anyone standing beside her. I remembered how proud I'd been, how safe the walls had felt back then. Somewhere along the way, I'd let that safety blur. I'd let him speak louder, decide more, claim ownership emotionally long before he ever tried legally. I had mistaken compromise for partnership and patience for peace. The weight of that realization pressed down hard. What if I hadn't installed that lock? What if I hadn't kept documentation? What if I had reacted emotionally instead of thinking clearly? I could see how easily this story could have gone another way. Me scrambling for an apartment, me paying rent somewhere else while still paying for a house I couldn't live in, me fighting uphill to prove what had been mine all along. That thought made my chest tighten. I put my head in my hands and finally let myself feel it. The fear, the exhaustion, the grief for a marriage that hadn't ended gently, but violently, with keys and threats and silence afterward. I didn't cry loudly. I just sat there, tears slipping down without sound, feeling the full weight of what it meant to be forced out of a place that had once been my refuge. And in that quiet, broken moment, something inside me hardened. Not into bitterness, into resolve. I couldn't undo what had happened. I couldn't make him understand. I couldn't salvage what we had lost. But I could make sure I never handed over that kind of power again. That night, lying awake in a borrowed room, I made myself a promise. This would be the last time anyone tried to erase me from my own life. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic confrontation. It came the next morning, quietly, while I was drinking coffee at my friend's kitchen table. Sunlight filtered through the window, and for the first time in days, my hands weren't shaking. My phone lay face down beside my mug, silent. No calls, no threats, no accusations demanding immediate attention. Just space. I realized then that everything had changed the moment I chose not to argue. Not when I caught the keys, not when the lock engaged, but when I stopped trying to convince him of anything. I opened my laptop and reread the messages he had sent overnight. The entitlement was impossible to ignore now, the way he referred to the house as his, the way he spoke as if I owed him access, explanation, compliance. Not once did he acknowledge throwing keys at me. Not once did he question whether he'd crossed a line. That was the clarity. This wasn't about anger or stress or a marriage falling apart. This was about control. He believed he could dictate the outcome because he assumed I would fold, that I would panic, that I would scramble to keep the peace. And when I didn't, everything he thought was solid collapsed. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called to walk me through next steps. His voice was calm, methodical. "We'll file for legal separation immediately," he said. "We'll establish that you were forced out and that the property is separate. The footage you sent makes this very clear." Hearing it stated so plainly grounded me. This wasn't personal anymore. It was procedural. That realization shifted something deep inside me. I wasn't reacting. I was acting. Every move I made from that point forward had intention behind it. I went back through my emails and found the original message from 8 months earlier, the one where I'd sent him his smart lock code and instructions. I forwarded it to my lawyer, along with screenshots showing he'd never responded. Evidence. Not to hurt him, to protect myself. That evening, I stood outside the house for the first time since leaving. I didn't go in. I didn't knock. I just stood across the street, looking at the place that had once felt like a shared life and now felt like a boundary line. I didn't feel rage. I felt ownership. Not just of the house, but of my choices, of my future, of the woman I had been before I ever tried to make myself smaller for someone else's comfort. I turned away and walked back to my car without looking back. That was the moment I knew I wasn't trying to get my life back. I was building a new one, on my terms. The consequences didn't arrive with shouting or sirens. They arrived in paperwork, timelines, and silence. On January 3rd, the sheriff served him the documents at the house. I watched it happen through the doorbell camera, the same way I'd watched so much of this unravel. He opened the door, took the envelope, flipped through the pages, and stood very still. I could almost see the moment his confidence drained away. A temporary restraining order, a legal separation filing, clear language stating that he had to stay at least 100 yards away from me and the property until a hearing. The house, my house. He called from an unknown number 20 minutes later. I didn't answer. Then his lawyer called, voice clipped and irritated, accusing me of abusing the legal system to win a property dispute. "I'm not," I said calmly. "I'm responding to documented threats and physical aggression. The property issue is separate." There was a pause, papers rustling. "We'll contest it," the lawyer said. "You're welcome to," I replied. "Until then, the order stands." 2 hours later, I watched him load his car with whatever he could fit. Clothes, boxes, random items grabbed in a hurry. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked stunned, like someone realizing too late that the rules he thought applied to him never did. After that, everything slowed down. The divorce process took 4 months. He fought for the house, fought for alimony, fought for half of everything, arguing that 7 years of marriage meant community property applied to all of it. My lawyer presented the deed, the purchase records from 3 years before we met, the mortgage statements showing I'd paid it off before the wedding. The judge didn't hesitate. The house was separate property. There was no alimony. There was no claim to my savings or retirement. When the judge reviewed the doorbell footage and the messages demanding I leave, his tone shifted from neutral to visibly unimpressed. He called the claims baseless. He called the attempt to force me out inappropriate. He called the behavior unacceptable. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. I felt closure. By the time the divorce was finalized, he was living elsewhere, working again, quieter than he'd ever been. His family stopped calling. The threats disappeared. The entitlement evaporated once it met consequences it couldn't bully past. I returned to the house slowly. I changed the locks. Real changes this time. I repainted the walls he'd chosen. I replaced furniture that had never felt like mine. Piece by piece, I reclaimed the space. The smart lock stayed. I liked it. I just removed the automatic schedule and set a single code only I knew. No assumptions, no shared access, no room for misunderstanding. Friends asked me later if I felt guilty about how it went down, about the timing, about the lock engaging right when he tried to come home for his fresh start. I didn't. He threw keys at me. He told me to leave my own house. He assumed I would roll over. The house didn't betray him. His assumptions did. The house is quiet now. Not the tense, fragile quiet we lived in during the last year of our marriage, but a steady, honest kind of silence, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts without flinching. I walk through rooms that finally feel like mine again. The walls are a different color. The furniture is arranged the way I want it. The air feels lighter. People ask me if I feel guilty, about the lock, about the timing, about how things ended. I don't. What I feel is clarity. For years, I believed compromise meant shrinking, that being patient meant absorbing disrespect, that keeping the peace meant surrendering ground little by little until there was nothing left to stand on. I confused endurance with love and familiarity with safety. The truth is simpler than I ever wanted to admit. He didn't lose the house because of a lock. He lost it because he tried to take what wasn't his. He didn't lose the marriage because I left. He lost it the moment he threw keys at me and demanded control instead of conversation. The house didn't answer him that night. I did. Not with shouting, not with revenge, but with preparation, boundaries, and a refusal to panic. I learned that knowing your rights matters, that documentation matters, that staying calm when someone expects you to collapse can change the entire outcome. I learned that arrogance relies on assumptions, and assumptions fall apart when met with facts. Months after the divorce finalized, he sent me a message, his first since everything ended. He said he was sorry, said he'd been stressed, confused, said he hoped one day I could forgive him. I read it once, then I deleted it. Some apologies arrive too late to mean anything. Some bridges burn for a reason. The house still stands. The lock still works. Every time I walk through that front door, I remember the sound of keys hitting my chest and the certainty in his voice when he told me to leave. And I remember catching those keys calmly and saying, on time, meaning it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. It isn't even intentional. Sometimes it's simply being prepared, knowing your worth, and letting someone's own entitlement collapse under the weight of reality. The house answered first, and this time it answered for me.